us for the Five Towns Community Yom HaShoah program. We would like to acknowledge the presence of several distinguished community rabbis, as well as our elected officials, including Senator Todd Kaminsky. Please turn your attention to Swirly Fruchter, a local resident and student at DRS High School, who will share an excerpt from a memoir he wrote for the DRS Holocaust Journal, and then will recite Tehillim. Following Tehillim, Hatikva, and the national anthem, the Hal Fifth Grade Choir will perform under the direction of Sandy Shmueli. Swirly.
Reflecting on the past 16 years makes the poverty and adversity faced by my Zaidi, Israel Fruchter, that much more powerful. Despite the challenges he faced, my Zaidi remained a caring, selfless, and honorable man. These heroic traits are best illustrated by his life spent as a 20-year-old, a time usually coined one's prime. To my Zaidi's appalling and dreadful misfortune, the best years of his life were stolen from him and replaced with the heinous, life-scarring genocide, the Holocaust. Before the Holocaust began, my Zaidi was learning and teaching as a rabbi. Unfortunately, his dream was left as such, a vision unfulfilled. My Zaidi's perseverance and survival of the Holocaust is not what classifies him as my personal hero. He is a hero because after crawling out of the depths of hell, he managed to give others a second chance at a life they rightfully deserved. He fought injustice with the goal of making a positive impression on the world. In 1946, my Zaidi initiated an organization called Chevra Hatzalah, an organization whose mission was to help survivors build new lives. Chevra Hatzalah provided a wide array of resources and helpful networks for many people who wanted to emigrate to America. Building a new life was nothing more than a dream. Chevra Hatzalah paved the road to America for many people, providing them with what was called a Fruchter visa. This visa stated that Jews in Europe had relatives with the last name Fruchter, who were in the United States. Through this initiative, Holocaust survivors were enabled to continue their lives after fighting through hell on earth. My Zaidi saved countless lives and families by his selfless, courageous nature. He made a difference in the lives of people he never met and had no relationship with. My Zaidi may have passed away, but through his revolutionary acts, he will live forever. Having been named after him, I, Israel Fruchter, hope to live up to my namesake. Please rise for Tehillim. Shira Malos, Mimama Kim Gresi Adonai, Adonai, Shema Bakoli, Tiana, Nachakashivot, the Kol Tachanunai, Im Avanos Tishmaria, Adonai, Miyamot, Kim Chas Licha Leman, Tivare, Kivisi Adonai, Kivsa Nafshi, Belidoro, Hochalti, Nafshi Adonai, Mishomrim Laboker, Shomerim Laboker, Yachel Yisrael Adonai, Kim Adonai, Achazet Garbeim Ofidu, Behu Yivdas Israel, Mikol Avonasav.
Fire.
much, Cantor Kaplan. Before the choir begins, I want to remind people that there is another room across the hall with video and sound feed. If you're having trouble finding seats, there are many other seats across the hall. Also, just to remind the students that after you're finished with your performance, please exit the door as quietly as possible. If you are returning to the program, please see Mrs. Lyon afterwards and she will lead you back into the program quietly. Immediately after the choir concludes, the video segment will be shown as the children depart from the room. In the video, you will experience an 8-minute glimpse of the remarkable story about a man called the Angel of the Ghetto, a title from the soon-to-be-released book, Angel of the Ghetto. This piece briefly documents some of the experiences of Sam Salas of Hollis Hills, Queens. The segment was produced specifically for tonight from a documentary series featuring entrepreneurs that have built businesses facing the most challenging of circumstances. It was provided by Nan and Harold Klein of Teletime Video. The choir will now begin.
I was all on my own. The Holocaust gave me more courage. If I would be afraid, then I wouldn't survive the war. The train slowed it down. So I jumped. Nobody gives it to you, you gotta earn it. I was going 8 jobs an hour. I'll better make $1 my own instead to go for somebody to make them 5. I don't need no stock exchange. We are the stock exchange. I represent the 6 million. Today, they do close to $100 million business. I was born in a little town outside Białystok. I was 11 years old. I was the youngest in the family. My father was also in the meat business. We used to go to the slaughterhouse with him. That's what I learned how to, from watching and doing it. All my brothers. A brother he was a singer. When he was singing in a theater, and there used to be chandeliers, the chandeliers was ringing, such a voice he had. And I lost them all. They surrounded on a Friday when all the people were going to shul. So they packed in close to 3,000 people in the point of my life. I had the Virgin Mary outside my t-shirt and I was watching it. I wore the Virgin Mary for 3 years. They started organizing a ghetto, but I used to go every week to picking up food and bring to the ghetto. They used to call it the Malach, the angel, because there was a lot of times they offered all kind of rewards for people like me, and I had a couple partners with me. They were inside, I was outside. I used to throw them over the fence, and they used to take him, and I used to go get some more stuff. In 1942, they brought to a camp, an army camp in Białystok, over 35,000 Jewish people. And I was in this camp for 19 days, and I escaped. And from this camp, they used to load them on freight cars and take them to Treblinka, to the death camp. 3 days later, they caught me. One man fell, I couldn't carry him, so he hit me with a boat. So I had my leg. So he walked away and he shot the man to load us up on a train. And the train was easy, 150 people in each freight car. Like sardines, 14, 15 kilometers from Treblinka before. And when we came to a station, the train slowed it down. So I jumped. I asked my brother to jump with me. I begged him, and he did not move. He was with his girlfriend, and I never heard of him. When I came to the United States, the same day I got off on the ship, I found a job. Yes, for butchers. I raised my hand, and I had a job for 6.5 years. They hired a man to become a foreman. I lent him $20. So I said, can I get my 20? I gotta go over to the bank, I gotta make a deposit. Just like this, I said to him. So he says to me, it's too bad Hitler didn't come in and kill the rest of you over here. I said, what did you say? So I grabbed a knife and I ran towards him outside. I said to the cops, I'll kill him. And I went upstairs and I said, I'll leave, I quit. The day I quit, the same day I started a business. The Holocaust gave me more courage. In 57, in August, I started my business. Roughly by a year later, some people from the mob come to approach me. They wanted a piece of the business. So I refused it, even to talk to them people. So a week later, over the weekend, they burned my door down. 6 months later, after this coincidence, 2 men shows up with a suitcase with money. So when I looked at them, I ran over and there was a machete laying on a block, and I grabbed the machete, so they ran away. So here I am today, after 59 years, from one truck. Today we have close to 30 trucks. We keep on growing, my 2 sons with me. I'm going to be 89, and I enjoy it to come I leave my house 8 o'clock evening, and the following day, between 1 and 2, I leave like 17, 18 hours a day. And I'm observing, and I'm still learning for young blood. It doesn't matter how much I know, I still can use more and more education. I'll never retire till I'm forced to retire. This place is not for sale. They offered us $75 million for the place. The place is not for sale. This business means to me, I achieved my goal. People offered me to go on the stock exchange and everything. I don't need no stock exchange. We are the stock exchange. After you go through the Holocaust, and if we don't have a country, then we ain't got no room nowhere in the world. And some people have to see if they can, if they be able to help Israel to grow. And I enjoyed to do that. I was involved 7 ambulances to send to Israel. 1 operating crew in Shalom, the biggest hospital in Israel, and keep sending, and we don't say no. Where I lost my family, and if my family would be here, they would be very proud of me to do and become a success. They would be in heaven to see what I do. Maybe I'm here to make it up for them. I'm representing the 6 million, 6 million, 6 million, 6 million.
We are so honored to have Sam Salas, the survivor featured in that video, and his family here tonight. Sam. Sam will be one of the survivors participating in the candlelighting ceremony later in the program. I want to thank Cedarhurst Village Trustee Myrna Disman and Councilman Bruce Wakeman for joining us tonight. Honored rabbis and distinguished guests, on behalf of my co-chairman Nathaniel Rogoff and the entire committee, thank you for joining us this evening. Tonight is a night when our community comes together to pay tribute to our family members, loved ones, and ancestors who were murdered al Kiddush Hashem. A night where we reflect on lessons learned from the atrocities committed against our people. A night where we remember. In thinking about Holocaust poetry and songs I learned as a child, memory is a fundamental theme. What does it mean to remember? The basic definition of remember is to have in or be able to bring to one's mind awareness of someone or something that one has seen, known, or experienced in the past. But interestingly, we learn a different concept of remembering in the Torah, where we are commanded, Zachor et asher asa lecha Amalek b'derech b'tzeichem miMitzrayim. Remember what Amalek did to you on your way out of Egypt. In the Torah, the commandment to remember is given in perpetuity, not only to those who literally experienced what Amalek did, those who, by remembering, could bring to their minds an awareness of something they had experienced in the past, but also for all future generations. So how is that possible to do? And why is it so important for all generations to remember what Amalek did to us, the Jewish people? The Sefer HaChinuch explains that the reason that Zechira, remembrance of Amalek is so critical is because Amalek was the founder of anti-Semitism. Amalek created the reality that the Jewish people can be hated. The Sefer HaChinuch says that when we remember Amalek and the anti-Semitism that Amalek represents, we remind ourselves that anyone who torments the Jewish people is hated by God. Sadly, we know the theme of anti-Semitism permeates throughout history. Our guards can never be down. When we think we have found safety and security, we are reminded that the principles of Amalek are in full force. They are found in bomb threats to JCCs around the country. They are found in Holocaust deniers. They are found in physical attacks on French Jews. They are found in assignments given to high school students in Syracuse to write persuasive essays defending the final solution. Anti-Semitism continues to rear its ugly head and tries to threaten our existence as a Jewish nation. But we remember that we are loved by God. We remember that we have defied all odds and continue to exist as a nation despite Amalek, despite the Greeks, the Romans, Haman, the Crusaders, Hitler and the Nazis, Ahmadinejad, and all those who have tried and will try to destroy us. We remember that God hates evil and hates everyone who puts themselves in Amalek's category. We are living through critical time in Jewish history when the eyewitnesses to the horrors of the Holocaust are disappearing. These are not strangers. These are not historical figures out of a book. These are our parents, our grandparents, our aunts, our uncles, our brothers and sisters. Our parents who were torn away from their mother's loving arms. Our grandparents who were separated from their families, never to be reunited. Our aunts and uncles shoved into cattle cars with no food or drink, limited air to breathe as fear and death surrounded them. Our brothers and sisters who were starved, beaten, tortured, and murdered. So even though I wasn't there and I did not experience this myself, I will remember. I will remember because it is my duty as the granddaughter of Lana and Abraham Lipner and Helen and Leo Kodowitz. When I watched my daughter list the names of my great aunts and uncles that I would never meet on her family tree project, I knew I had to teach her to remember. And when I saw her cry after interviewing a survivor for her Names Not Numbers project, I knew that she would also remember. I look out at this crowd tonight and I'm comforted because you have remembered. You do remember, you will remember, and you will also teach your children to remember. In our prayers on Friday nights, we sing a quote from Tehillim, Ohavei Hashem, Sinu Ra. Those who love God hate evil. We remember the evil of Amalek, the evil of the Nazis, and the evil of anti-Semitism in order to remind us of God's hatred for evil. When we hate evil, we demonstrate our love for and emulation of God. We demonstrate that we cleave to the values of our people, loving kindness, honesty, and humility, even in the face of hardship, hatred, and torture. We will now hear from Mrs. Marion Blumenthal-Lazan, a child survivor, noted author of The Four Perfect Pebbles, and longtime Hewlett resident. Marion and her loving husband Nathaniel have devoted their lives to educating others about the story of Marion's family and the significance of hearing eyewitness testimony of the Holocaust. I promised Marion I would keep her introduction short and let her tell her own story. And with that, I would like to now call upon our Find That God Is Spelled Heller keynote speaker, Mrs. Marion Blumenthal-Lazan.
Thank you, Dana, for your meaningful and kind introduction. I thank you and Nathaniel Rodolph for giving me the opportunity to participate in this evening's Yom HaShoah commemoration. What makes this day, April 23rd, so extra special for me is the fact that on This date, April 23rd, 1945, my family and I were liberated. This evening, I'm here to share my story with you. It is my childhood experiences during World War II, in the concentration camps. I will tell you about our liberation and how we finally started our lives anew in our blessed United States of America. Mine is a story that conveys a message of perseverance, determination, faith, and above all, hope. Life in the early 1930s in Germany was very much for my family as it is here for most of us today. Never did we think that the anti-Semitic incidents there would ever lead to very much. My father was in a successful shoe business in a small town. My parents, 2-year older brother and I lived comfortably with my grandparents above the shoe store. Life for Jews was made increasingly more difficult, and in 1935, the Nuremberg laws were formulated and enforced. As these restrictions imposed on the Jews in Germany went on and on, my parents decided to make arrangements to leave the country. My grandparents, who were in their late 70s and ill, refused to leave their home. They could not understand the urgency or the necessity of doing so. My grandparents passed away in 1938, just 11 days within each other. And soon thereafter, we received our necessary papers for our immigration to America. I was just 4 years old at that time. November 9th, 1938, Kristallnacht, or Crystal Night. It was the night of broken glass, when the Nazis and their followers smashed the windows and the storefronts of Jewish-owned stores. Jewish establishments, Sefer Torah, and Jewish books were burned and destroyed. This was the beginning of a massive pogrom against the Jews in Germany, a massive verbal and physical assault against all German Jews. In reality, this was the beginning of the Shoah. On November 12th, following Kristallnacht, the German government actually fined the Jewish population for the damage caused that night. These imposed taxes were used to rearm Germany. The night of Kristallnacht, my father was taken away from our home, and unbeknownst to my mother, was sent to concentration camp Buchenwald in Germany. All sorts of terrible stories were related to my mother, and we did not know if we would ever see my father again. He was released after 10 days only because our papers were in order for our immigration to America. And to think that just a few years prior, he had been awarded the Iron Cross for his military service in the German Army of World War I. We were forced to sell both our home and our business for a fraction of its worth. And soon thereafter, in January of 1939, we left for Holland, from where we were to sail to the United States. And for almost 9 months, while awaiting our quota number from the American State Department, my parents were assigned to take care of some 125 children. These young children had been sent by their parents from various parts of Europe to escape from the Nazis. In December of that year, 1939, we were deported to the detention camp of Westerbork in Holland to await our departure day to America. Camp Westerbork was constructed by the Dutch to accommodate Jews from various parts of Europe. In May of 1940, just 1 month before our planned departure date, the Germans invaded Holland and we were trapped. All of our belongings, which were about to be loaded on board ship, were burned and destroyed as the harbor of Rotterdam was bombed. Under Dutch control, Camp Westerbork was tolerable. My mother, father, brother, and I shared 2 small rooms. We all ate in a communal dining room, and at that time there was enough food for us. so that we did not go hungry. Adults were assigned to various work duties. My father worked to repair shoes, my mother worked in the kitchen. We children had a makeshift education and lived a very dull, stagnant life. Several months later, when the Nazi SS took over the command of Westerbork, we became acquainted with the ever-present, terrifying 12-foot-high barbed wire. And as thousands of Jews were rounded up, many taken from their hiding places, as was Anne Frank and her family, Camp Westerbork became overcrowded, and it was at that time that we had to share our small quarters with another family. And then the dreadful transports to the concentration and extermination camps in Eastern Europe began. This started in early 1942, and from then on, every Monday night, lists of those to be deported were posted, causing incredible anxiety, anguish, and fear. And then on Tuesday morning, men, women, and little ones were marched to a nearby railroad platform from where they were transported. This area became known as Boulevard de Misère. It was an area of complete misery. At 11 o'clock on Tuesday mornings, the trains left for their destination. And of the total 120,000 men, women, and children that departed Westerbork, 102,000 were doomed never to return. In January of 1944, it was our turn to be shipped out. We children were actually glad for a change of environment. We were very naive, and we welcomed the move. We were allowed to take one knapsack each, and whatever we could stuff into it, we were permitted to take. When we approached the railroad platform and we saw the cattle cars in which we were to travel, our fears began to mount. Adults suspected, and they somehow knew what was in store for us. I remember that it was a bitter cold, pitch black, rainy night when we arrived at our destination, concentration camp Bergen-Belsen in Germany. We were pulled and dragged out of the cattle cars and greeted by the German guards who were shouting at us and threatening us with their rifles and with the most vicious attack dogs by their sides. I was a very frightened 9-year-old, and to this day I still feel a certain sense of fear whenever I see a German shepherd. Bergen-Belsen was divided into various areas. It was sectioned off and surrounded by electrified barbed wire. Guards were always in strategically placed high guard towers, and in the evening, as soon as it would turn dark, the bright searchlights from above would constantly sweep the campgrounds. We were placed in a section that was known as the Sternlager, or the Star Camp, named so because we had to continue wearing that yellow star which had been issued to us back in Holland. Men were on one side of the camp and the women on the other, and this did make it possible at times for families to get a glimpse of one another. 600 of us, 600 of our people were crammed into each of the crude, wooden, heatless barracks meant for 100 when originally built. There were triple-decker bunk beds with 2 people sharing each bunk. German winters were bitter cold and very long. We were given only one thin blanket per bunk and a straw-filled mattress, and this bunk was our only living quarters, and that for 2 people. I was very lucky that I was able to share a bunk with my mother, and that my brother was able to share a bunk with our father. But can you imagine 2 adults, 2 strangers, sharing a bunk under such horrendous conditions? A bunk that was no larger than the small cot bed that we're all so familiar with. I remember the first time seeing a wagon filled with what I thought was firewood for the one small oven that we had in our barrack. That oven, of course, was never used. I soon realized that what was in the wagon were dead, naked bodies, thrown one on top of the other. Toilets and so-called washing facilities were at a great distance. In the most primitive outhouses, toilets were long wooden benches with holes cut into them, one next to the other. There was no privacy, there was no toilet paper, there was no soap, and hardly ever any water with which to wash. And in the almost year and a half that we were in Bergen-Belsen, never once were we able to brush our teeth. There were no trees, no flowers, nor did we ever see a blade of grass. And whenever it rained, we had to slush through the mud, adding even more misery to our already dismal existence. Every morning, every single morning, without fail, we were ordered to line up on a huge field. It was called an Appellplatz, 5 in a row as we were counted. We would have to stand there until each and every one of us was accounted for, often from early morning till late at night, without food, without water, no matter what the weather, without protective clothing. Frostbite was common. We would treat our affected toes and fingers with the warmth of our own urine. Our diet consisted of a slice of bread a day, a pat of butter, some hot watery soup with grizzly meats and turnips and potato peels. The bread was later cut back and given to us just once a week, and only if our so-called quarters were neat and in order. Our birthday present to one another was that little piece of bread that we had saved up from the previous week. My father, who was ritually observant, became even more so as time went on. He refused to eat the so-called soup because it contained non-kosher meat. He would daven in secret whenever possible and later fill in. Once a month, we were marched to an area to shower, and there, under the watchful eyes of the guards, we were ordered to undress. We had heard about exterminations and gas chambers in other areas of Europe, and we therefore were never sure when the faucets were turned on as to what would come out, water or gas. The Nazis did their utmost to break us physically, spiritually, and emotionally. Unfortunately, they did succeed with many of our people. It was not uncommon for people who were no longer responsible for their actions to attempt escape, even though they knew that the chance to succeed was next to impossible. But they also felt that they had nothing more to lose. The failure of their attempts were obvious when we saw their lifeless bodies hanging electrocuted against the barbed wire. Malnutrition, dysentery, and the loss of the will to go on is what destroyed body and mind. Death was an everyday occurrence. The dark crowded quarters often caused us to trip and fall over the dead. Bodies could not be taken away fast enough. We as children saw things that no one, no matter what the age, should ever have to see. I know, of course, that you are all very aware of the Shoah, have seen movies, have read books, have seen 2 documentaries, but the constant foul odor, the filth, continuous horror and fear surrounded by death is indescribable. There is no way that this can be put accurately into words or pictures. Our bodies, hair, and clothes were infested with lice. We learned that there was a distinct difference between head lice and clothes lice. Squashing them between my thumbnails became my primary pastime. Much of my time was taken up with make-believe games, and one game, a game based on superstition, became very important to me. I decided that if I were to find 4 pebbles of about the same size and shape, that would mean that the 4 members of my family would all survive. My mother, my father, my brother, and I. It was a torturous, painful, very difficult game to play. What if I couldn't find the 3rd or 4th pebble? Might that mean that 1 or 2 of my family members would not pull through? Nevertheless, this game gave me something to hold on to, some distant hope. After a number of months on our meager diets, our stomachs shrunk so that the hunger was no longer painful. Teenagers and men suffered most from malnutrition and were the first to die. Those who lasted the longest were the women, and mothers in particular. It was their strong will to keep their children alive that kept them going. And my mother was one of those remarkable ladies. There is no doubt in my mind that it was my mother's inner strength and fortitude that finally saw us through. One day, my mother was able to smuggle some potatoes and some salt from the kitchen where she worked, using an empty can as a pot and pieces from the wooden slats from our bunk as firewood. My mother somehow managed to cook some soup in secret. This was done on our bunk. I was on the bunk with her, trying to hide and shield what she was doing. Soup was simmering, just about finished, when the German guards entered our barrack for surprise inspection. In our rush to hide that setup, the boiling soup spilled on my leg. We had been taught self-discipline and self-control the hard way, for I knew for sure that if I had cried out, it would have cost us our lives. This happened in the spring of 1945. I was just 10 years old. The population in Camp Bergen-Belsen were dying off rapidly, but not nearly fast enough to satisfy the Nazis. Several weeks later, it was decided to send 3 trainloads of our people to Eastern Europe, towards the extermination camps and the gas chambers. We had not known that Auschwitz, with its gas chambers, had already been liberated. My family was among the 2,500 on the last of these 3 trains. It was April of 1945. Russians army was closing in from the northeast, and the British and the Americans from the west. Under normal conditions, this train ride from Bergen-Belsen to whatever area of Eastern Europe they were going to send us would have taken no more than 10 hours. But because the Germans tried to evade the Allies, we were en route for 2 long weeks, without food, without water, without medical supplies, without sanitary facilities. That meant no toilets. Whenever the train came to a stop, those who were able and those who were strong enough were permitted to get out and take a drink from a nearby stream or dig up roots to eat. My mother remembered taking some sort of a pot and collecting water from the locomotive, and who knows what else that pot was used for. The need for water at that time was almost more important than food because of the severe dehydration due to the dysentery and the high fever due to the typhus. Let me briefly explain typhus. It is a highly contagious, deadly disease caused from filth and spread by lice. At the same time, while the train was at a standstill, the newly dead were taken off and buried along the tracks. In addition, our train was subject to frequent air attacks by the Allies. It is truly remarkable how any one of us was able to survive under such horrendous conditions. In fact, 500 of our people, that's 1 out of every 5, died en route or shortly thereafter. My burnt leg was severely infected, and it was impossible to keep the wound clean or lice-free. In late April, after 14 days of this surreal and horrifying journey, the German guards stormed frantically through the train, seeking civilian clothing so that they would not be recognized by the Allies. And we knew then that the war was coming to an end. It was the Russian army that liberated our train and led us to a nearby farm village in eastern Germany. Most of the inhabitants had fled, and we took over their homes. Kitchens were stocked with ample food. It was rich and good, actually much too good for our starved bodies. We could not tolerate that unfamiliar nourishment. And at that time, at the age of 10 and a half, I weighed 16 kilos, or as we know it here, 35 pounds. And my mother weighed a mere 70 pounds. The Russians, in their crude way, tried to help us the best that they could. I was brought to a nearby clinic for medical attention. My leg was in very bad condition, and I was close to losing it. Fortunately, it was decided to treat the wound, and I was very lucky that my leg responded to medication and it gradually healed. As I regained my strength, I also relearned to walk. And in the interim, our heads were shaved because that was the only way that we could rid ourselves of head lice. Although we were all weak, ill, and thoroughly exhausted, I vividly remember the spring of 1945. The weather was beautiful, sunny and bright. Trees and grass were lush and green. Flowers were in bloom. The birds were singing. It was a wonderful, exciting feeling to be free at long last. We were all ill with typhus, but my father had to die from it 6 weeks after our liberation. And this after 6.5 years of mental torment and physical abuse. My 12-year-old brother Albert actually helped bury our father. When I talk about those years, it is as though I'm relating a nightmare, a very bad dream. I separate myself from it ever having happened to me, and that is how I deal with it. It is a wonderful story of how we gradually recuperated and were sent back to Holland to start our lives anew. My brother and I were eventually placed in a youth Aliyah home in preparation to live in what was then British-controlled Palestine, and we know today as Medinat Israel. Most of the children in this home survived alone, without their parents. I felt like a total misfit. I needed to learn how to resettle into a normal society. I had no training for that. Here I was, by this time, 11 years old. I had never been in the store. I had no idea what money was all about. I had almost no table manners. It was like learning to live all over again. It was in this home that we became reacquainted with life in its normal state. Meals served us were delicious and nourishing. You can imagine that just about anything and everything tasted good to us. I began my first formal education at that time at the age of 11 and a half. We were taught the secular subjects, reading, writing, arithmetic, in a Montessori school where we progressed at our own pace. The Dutch language in which we were taught was all new to us. We also received a thorough education in Hebrew and in religious studies. The British, who were governing Palestine in the 1940s, had issued what was known as the White Paper, restricting the number of Jews permitted into the land. They were intercepting many of the refugee ships and interning the survivors on the island of Cyprus. And in some cases, they actually turned the ships back to Europe. In November of 1947, the United Nations voted to partition Palestine between Arabs and Jews, which on May 14, 1948, led to the establishment of the State of Israel. In 1947, just 1 year prior to Israel becoming a state, our illegal voyage from Holland to Palestine was planned, and danger once again loomed over us. And because parents at that time were not permitted to accompany their children, my mother managed to make arrangements for a family of 3 to emigrate to the United States. And thanks to the Holland America line, we were able to use the tickets which had been purchased 10 years earlier. We arrived in Hoboken, New Jersey, April 23rd, here's that date again, 1945. By coincidence, 1948. By coincidence, exactly 3 years to the day of our liberation. It was a Jewish relief organization, the Hebrew Immigration Aid Society, that found a home for us in Peoria, Illinois. Never heard of Illinois, definitely not Peoria. And there, at the age of 13, I once again started life anew in a strange land and again learning a new language. My third new language in less than 3 years. First Dutch, then Hebrew, and now English. And because of my inability to speak English, I, at the age of 13, was placed in the 4th grade with 9-year-olds. Although both my brother and I worked long hours after school to help our mom pay bills, I nevertheless found time, actually made time, to take extra courses during the year, attend summer school, and by working very hard in my studies, I was able to be graduated from Peoria Central High School 5 years later at age 18, ranking 8th in a class of 267 students. It was 2 months after high school graduation that I was married to Nathaniel Mazan, who I had met at the age of 16 on Yom Kippur in Shul in Peoria. And God willing, we'll be celebrating our 64th wedding anniversary this coming August. Nathaniel, every bit of that applause. I am grateful. I am very grateful that I survived healthy in body, mind, and spirit, and that together with my husband, I'm able to perpetuate our heritage with a wonderful family. We have 3 wonderful married children who've given us 9 magnificent grandchildren, 4 of whom married, and our family sitting right there in the front row. Thank you for being here. And our granddaughter Ariel and our husband Moshe have given us 3 magnificent great-granddaughters. Amazing, amazing. I know that there's a fourth generation young man here, which is absolutely wonderful. And I would like to show you a photo that Nathaniel did this morning. I don't know why I did it, but anyway, this is my mother with our great-granddaughter, Leah Tova, and that makes 5 generations. I'm over there too, but this is 5 generations, and survival and continuity, right? Good job, Nathaniel. And in March of 1996, my memoir, 4 Perfect Pebbles, co-authored by Lyra Pearl, was published. That's 21 years ago. It's in German, it's in Dutch, just came out in Hebrew by Yad Vashem. If you like, you may read it in Japanese. But above all, I am so grateful that the story is in book form so that it can be passed on to future generations. So you see that despite all the terrible things that happened to me as a child, my life today is full and rewarding. Although I've spoken to upward of 1 million students and adults over these past 20-some years, it still has not become easy. However, I do realize the importance of sharing that period of our history with you, and particularly with our young people. It is their generation, that's the very last generation that will hear these stories firsthand. And I ask them, you the young people here this evening, to please share my story or any of the Holocaust stories that you read and hear about. Share them with your friends, share them with your relatives, and someday share them with your children. And yes, even with your grandchildren. When we're not here any longer, it is you who will have to bear witness. As difficult as it is, the horror of the Shoah must be taught, must be studied, and kept alive, only then can we guard it from ever happening again. This is the very yellow star that I was forced to wear. It says Jude, which in German means Jew. It was just another way to denigrate us, to isolate us, and to set us apart from the rest of society. This represents our Magen David, a beautiful, meaningful Jewish symbol. But the Nazis made it so very ugly. Each of us, each and every one of us, must do everything in our power to prevent such hatred, such destruction, and such terror from reoccurring. And we can begin by having love, respect, and tolerance towards one another, regardless of the religious belief, regardless of the color of our skin, regardless of the national origin. This respect towards one another must begin in our homes. We, the adults, must pass it on in our places of business, the students in their schools, communities, towns, cities, and only if there's respect and tolerance towards one another in the countries can we expect to have peace in the world. We must begin with our children. Let us treat people as individuals. Let us look for similarities and respect the differences. Let us build bridges and reach out towards one another. And we must be true to ourselves and not blindly follow a leader, without thinking ahead and searching our hearts and our minds as to what the consequences might be. As I tell the students, it is not cool to follow just anyone's lead without first checking to see what his or her true intentions are. We are all aware that 6 million of our people were murdered during the Shoah. We also need to remember that 5 million non-Jews lost their lives. And among them are the righteous Gentiles, as we refer to them, very special people, non-Jews who jeopardized their lives to save Jewish families. They were hidden in attics and basements, farmers out in their barns. They were hidden in convents. And when these good people were caught doing what they thought was the right thing to do, they also were deported to concentration camps and in many cases lost their lives. And that brings me to another message. We must never generalize and judge an entire group by the actions of some within that group. These are all universal messages, messages that each and every one of us is familiar with to varying degrees, but need to be reminded of over and over again. And this certainly was a good opportunity to do so. These messages are the lessons learned from that dark period of our history, and certainly apply to today's world situation, and definitely to our own individual lives. By listening, I hope that our young people prevent our past from becoming their future. This was my mother on her 104th birthday. Mom sadly passed away 4 years ago, 6 weeks short of 105. Amazing, amazing lady. Took one medication for high blood pressure. I decided long ago that Tylenol is not a medication. And an amazing lady. My brother deals with this altogether differently than I do. He will not talk about it as freely as you heard it from me this evening. Lives in California, happily married, but by choice will not bring children into this world. Has a very difficult time with organized religion, including ours. All of that makes me very sad. But I do not fault Albert. We have to remember he's 2 years older than I am, was with my father in the men's section. And I'm convinced that he saw and experienced things that I did not. Hashem puts us on this earth. Gives us a beautiful mind, It is this mind that allows us to choose right from wrong, good from evil. We are capable of making choices. Therefore, men did this to one another. But did he have to make it so bitterly cold when we were standing out there on the plow all day? Have a direct line, ask loads of questions, don't get too many answers, but that's okay. Faith I will always have. After all, here I am. 3 children, married children, 9 grandchildren, 4 of whom are married, and 3 magnificent great-granddaughters from whom generations will be forthcoming. He made sure that enough of us survived so that we will always be here. I am proud of my faith. And when I speak to a mixed audience, I tell them they certainly are proud of their faith, they're certainly proud of their heritage, but please, please, let us all remember to respect the right of others to their belief. Be kind and good and respectful and tolerant towards one another. That is the basis for peace. Had there been respect and tolerance towards one another some 70 years ago, I would not be here this evening to share that dark period of our history. All these countries that are in such turmoil would be peaceful countries for its people. Be kind and good and respectful towards one another, please. It is such a simple message and yet so difficult to achieve. There is very little that we can do against the negativity in our world, but how we treat, behave, and reach out towards one another, that is entirely up to us. Did I ever find my 4 pebbles? I certainly did. She did all the time. When I found them, I couldn't save in the same place, in the safe place. Next time I searched for them, couldn't find that 3rd one, that 4th one. Well, I knew exactly where to go and pick them up. It was my game, I made the rules. I was very young, 9, 10 years old, had nothing to occupy my time with constructively. So I had these wonderful imaginative games. And these imaginative games were my survival techniques. They were my survival skills. We all have survival techniques within us. When the need arises, we just have to search for them, find them, and be sure that we put them to work. No one is spared adversity. No one is spared hardship. We all have to overcome obstacles at one time or another. But with perseverance, determination, faith, and above all hope, one can overcome just about anything and everything. Above all, don't ever give up hope. We returned to Germany on various occasions and visited my father. The first time was in 1995. It was the 50th anniversary of our liberation. And we visited my father's grave. The reason my father and about 60 others have a private resting place in that farm village where we were liberated was because they died after some of the chaos had subsided. Those who died early on were all buried in mass graves. We went to Bergen-Belsen. Bergen-Belsen looks nothing the way I remember it. Had been burned down under the direction of President Eisenhower, who was then the commander of the Allied forces, because the conditions of the camp would have created tremendous health hazards. So today, Bergen-Belsen looks like a park. Green grass, shrubs, trees, not bad looking at all, except for the mounds everywhere. Mounds with flags that read, "Here lie 1,000, here lie 2,500. These are the mass graves of our people." We went to my former hometown of Hoya near Hanover, and they were greeted by public officials who apologized over and over again. And then there was a young non-Jewish couple born after the war, and they took us to the Jewish cemetery, which was in terrible disarray, had not been cared for since 1938. Took us to our family plot, and there among the toppled over stones was a brand new shiny granite footstone with the inscription that I will translate from the German. "In memory of the desecrated plot of the Blumenthal family, Hoya 1894 to 1938, placed there by this non-Jewish young German couple, unbeknownst to us, a most beautiful, generous gesture. I never thought that I would refer to non-Jewish Germans in such glowing terms. It's people like these that renew one's faith in humanity. and have become dear, dear friends of ours. Every time we return, we've been back 7, 8 times. I speak in schools and universities. I do so in German, tremendously well received, but so difficult for today's young people to hear after all that happened in their country by their own people, their grandparents and great-grandparent generation. Huge burden for these young people, and unfortunately, it will be a burden for generations to come. And then we returned in 2010 because a brand new public high school in my hometown was named in my honor. So now we have the Marian Blumenthal Oberschule in Hoya. Tremendous celebration and very courageous for this road time to redress what happened in their midst so many years ago. And the night before the celebration, we commemorated the night of broken glass when the site where our synagogue once stood. Difficult trips, but no regrets having returned. September 11, 2001. None of us will ever be allowed to forget that date as long as we live. At that time, Nathaniel and I were in Florida visiting children and grandchildren. And because all planes were grounded, we chose to drive home. And as we approached New York and crossed the Verrazano Bridge, amidst the smoking ruins of the Twin Towers, we could see the Statue of Liberty holding high the torch of freedom. It is that flame of freedom that the terrorists sought to destroy, but they could not, and they never will, because we will take good care of our freedom. We will safeguard our freedom. We will not and must not take our freedom for granted. Let us all, each and every one of us, redouble our efforts to be kind and good towards one another. And with that, I wish each and every one of you, your children, your grandchildren, and all succeeding generations a healthy, happy, productive future in a world of love and peace. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Beautiful, beautiful words. I'd now like to call upon Rabbi Yisrael Moshe Sif, dedicated and beloved Rebbe at Hafner Middle School, to introduce our 4th generation speaker, Jake Baby.
Shen's was I tiftach, fi yagit yilasecha. Yuler atzon refi, Kadosh Baruch Hu. Please help that I say the proper words. Hineni ha'ani nimas, nirash v'nifchad. Who am I to speak in front of Giborim, of heroes, who survived the darkest times of modern Jewish history? Times in which the words of the Tochacha and Devarim say, Baboker yomar miyitein erev, uva erev yomar miyitein boker. At day one will say is their night, and at night one will say is their day. However, Rov Am, Hadras Melech, Verina, Yispoyer Shimcha Malkeinu. We gather to remember and we gather to sanctify the Shem Shammai in the name of heaven. Rabbi Ephraim Oshri Zatzal told me that he was the Rav of the Ghetto, who was miraculously kept alive as the curator of the museum that the Nazis, Yamach Shimon Mizrachron, planned to construct. When we lived on the Lower East Side, we had the schus to live in the same building as Rabbi Oshri Zatzal. On Leil Shabbos, we would walk Rabbi Oshri home from shul. During this time of year, Rabbi Oshri would ask me, "Nu, Yisrael Moshe, what's going on in yeshiva?" I would say we were having programs for Yom HaShoah. Rabbi Oshri would take me under the arm and say, "Yisrael Moshe," or as he used to say, Yisrael Mason, "Sag nicht zu den Kindern, wir haben gestorben als wie ein Jid. Tut mir ein Teufel. Sag zu den Kindern, wir haben gelebt als wie ein Jid." Yisrael Moshe, please don't tell the children how we just died as a Jew. Please tell the children also how we lived as a Jew. Tell the children how people would ask how to live like a Jew under such duress and torturous ghetto conditions. Rabbi Yosha would look at me and say, "Please take my sefer. Tell the children how people would ask and want to Kaddish for themselves today if they know that tonight they're going to be killed. Can we put on tefillin very early in the morning if we're going to be working all night?" In my mind, the words of Rabbi Oshri as well were, "Yisrael Moshe, please don't just tell the children how people died on Kiddush Hashem. Teach the children and the people how to live on Kiddush Hashem. Teach the Tzibur what it means when somebody says, wow, they're doing this act of chesed, they're doing this kindness because they are a Jew, because they are a Yid." What if we had a world where there's a conscious effort that 6 million live on Kiddush Hashem for the 6 million who died on Kiddush Hashem? What would a world look like? Tritely, perhaps, if there were magnets on the back of a car that said, "I'll be never be part of the 6 million who live on Kiddush Hashem." Somebody here in our tzibur must be able to design and produce this magnet. What would a world of Mekatche Hashem look like? The pasuk in Parshas Ha'azinu tells us the idea of studying history. Zichor Yemos Olam, Binu Shino Stor Vador. Remember the days of the past. Understand the years of generation after generation. Zachar or Zichar and Binu, 2 verbs. Remember and understand. Firstly, the pasuk says, remember what was. Secondly, the pasuk says, understand the years of generation after generation. Is the second part of the pasuk a continuation of the first part? Remember the days that were and understand generations. Or are there 2 parts of the pasuk? One saying, remember what was, and one saying, think about what could be. Rashi, one of the famous commentaries on the Psukim, says actually that there are 2 explanations. The first explanation is the pasuk is said as one continued statement. Remember and understand history. Rashi then explains the second understanding. The Zechor Yemos Olam means remember what was. Binu Shanos Dor means understand, refers to the future history. Rashi continues and says, fascinating because it's not often that Rashi talks this way. Sheish biyodo leheitiv lachem u'lahamchil lachem. He says the words Yemos HaMashiach v'olam haba. Rashi explains that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has the ability to do good to and for us and to give us the days of Moshiach and Olam Haba. Zechor, remember the past, and be to understand what is in store for us in the future. Tonight, we are fulfilling both parts of the pasuk, as well as both shot and both explanations. We have been Zechor Yemos Olam and Binu Shnos Dor Vador. We've been remembering and understanding our history of 70 plus years ago. We are also understanding our future and what our destiny has for us. We are about to hear from a young man who symbolizes our future history. A boy who symbolizes living Al Kiddush Hashem. Baruch Jake Levy, a caring, sensitive, warm, dedicated, sweet, fun, passionate Jew who consistently makes a Kiddush Hashem with his kind demeanor and twinkle in his eye. To watch Jake wrap himself up in his palace and tefillin is to say, Chazak ve'ematz, be strong and be courageous. Giborim, heroes, you have heroically survived the darkest times of modern Jewish history to know that there is a glorious continuation in what you have survived for. Chazak ve'ematz. You were strong and courageous. Chazak ve'ematz, continue to be strong and courageous. L'chvod hakol hakadosh hazeh, holy, sacred gathering congregation. It is a distinct honor and privilege. It's a schus to introduce to you a boy from our yeshiva from Hafter, from the Hebrew Academy of the Five Towns in Rockaway, the son of Sal and Eti Levy. I proudly present to you Baruch Jake Levy.
Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Jake Levy. I am 13 years old and I am an 8th grade student at Hafton Middle School. I had the pleasure and great privilege to have met my great-grandfather on my mother's side, my Zayda, Henrik Strauss, Zichrono Livracha. And I have heard so much about my great-grandmother, Paula Strauss, Zichrono Livracha. Although I never met her, I feel a strong connection to her. She passed away 3 years before I was born. My due date was actually December 3rd, but I was born on the exact day she passed away, November 17th. She passed away November 17th, 2000, which is pretty amazing and has made me feel connected to her my whole life. For this reason, my parents named me after her. I felt that I could not turn down the opportunity to speak publicly about the Holocaust. As the great-grandson of 2 survivors, I believe that I have an obligation to speak, teach, and discuss what happened in Europe over 70 years ago. 70 years is a long time from the perspective of a 13-year-old boy, but it's a very short time in the scheme of history. As we get farther and farther from the events of the Shoah, the stories may begin to feel more like a story out of a textbook. Our ancestors fought for their lives so that they could continue to build families and raise us with the privilege of being able to sit in school and be educated, to learn Torah in a safe environment, and live freely, to practice our ideals and morals as we please. It is therefore incumbent on us, the future, to commit to keeping the stories alive, to make sure that others don't treat our family stories like a sad chapter in a dusty book on a shelf, but that they are remembered. I am here to remember. I am here as a proud representative of those who came before me. I am here as a storyteller, to tell their stories. My Zyga was from Lemberg, Poland, which was a Soviet and ultimately Nazi-occupied territory of Poland. When the war started, he was enlisted in the Polish army to fight the Germans. At some point, he was grazed by a bullet and luckily ended up in the hospital. One of the nurses that took care of him was a non-Jewish German woman. This woman loved my Zyga and decided to hide him in her house, knowing that he was a Jew and would otherwise be sent to a concentration camp. She was not an ordinary German woman. She was the daughter of the head Führer of the camp he was going to be sent to. My Zyga hid in a closet in their house for 2 years, right under the nose of the person who would have loved the opportunity to murder him. My Zyga promised to marry the woman after the war in order to keep himself protected. When the war ended, though, he told her he had to check to see if his family was still alive, but he never returned. We have all heard the statistics of the victims of the Shoah. 6 million people, 1.5 million children, but statistics can feel distant and cold. My Zyga lost everything and everyone. His wife, his children, his twin sister, his parents, his grandparents, and all of his siblings, who were all taken from above Ghetto, never to return. He found one first cousin after the war alive, who was ultimately shot by the British Army. He lost his entire family, every last person. When I hear that, the numbers are not statistics to me. The numbers are love. They are family, they are loss, they are pain. My Zyga didn't speak much about the Holocaust, but right before he passed away 9 years ago, he spoke about the Shafa, which means closet in Yiddish. This was a chilling moment for my family. In that moment, we understood the sacrifices he made that stayed with him his whole life and the pain he continued to endure through the memories of those he lost. My Bobby was from Stanislava, Poland. When the Germans invaded her town, it became a ghetto. My Bobby ran away with her 2 sisters and her 3-year-old son with the partisans to Russia. Her son became sick with typhoid fever, and she ran to a town very far away in the snow, barefoot with the hopes of finding penicillin. Interestingly, myself and my grandmother are both allergic to penicillin. She left her precious son with her 2 sisters. When she returned, her son had died. So had her 14-year-old younger sister, who couldn't handle the pain of losing her nephew, and said the baby needed her. My Bobby had to bury both her 14-year-old sister and 3-year-old son right there in the snow, and then move on with her life. How does someone carry on from something like that? After she fled, she never saw her parents, husband, or grandparents again. 1 sister and 4 of her brothers survived. My Bobby never spoke about her son that passed. There was one time my family heard her discuss it, which gave us an insight into the pain she had endured for so many years and the tremendous strength it took for her to cope with that loss. When my older brother Justin was sick in the hospital as a baby, he needed open heart surgery to save his life. My entire family was worried sick, and the one person who had stayed throughout the entire process was my great-grandmother. My mother was sitting by my brother the night before the surgery, crying, and my great-grandmother walked into the room and looked at my mother with her big, bright, green, glassy eyes and said, "You have nothing to worry about." She went on to say, "Finally, after all these years, I now understand why God took my 3-year-old son from me. It was so that your baby boy can be protected throughout the surgery and live." Even though my great-grandmother might not have been so Torah-focused, look at the great faith that she had. The amount of strength it takes for someone to understand something of this depth is incredible. Through all the pain and suffering she underwent, my Bobby's words greatly inspired me. This one instance gives me so much faith in the connectivity of the Jewish people and our families. Everything happens for a reason, and just because we can't see the greater picture in the moment, it is crucial for us to do our best and live by our morals and ethics. Now is our chance to be united and keep the flames of the mothers, fathers, daughters, sisters, brothers, uncles, aunts, grandfathers, grandmothers, and great-grandparents that were lost, alive through our actions and words. The survivors may not live forever, but their memories and stories of strength will live on forever. I will therefore continue to tell my great-grandparents' stories to the best of my ability. In every generation, enemies will try to destroy us, but the Jewish people will continue for eternity. Yehi Ratzon, may it be the will of Hashem that their strength will give us strength forever. Amen. Thank you.
Before we begin the candle lighting ceremony, there are several people Nathaniel and I have to thank. Thank you to our dedicated committee for their invaluable input and help planning, and those who contributed to the publicity of the event by designing, hanging, and posting flyers, those who spent countless hours speaking to, interviewing, and driving survivors who will participate now in the candle lighting ceremony, and those who coordinated with tonight's speakers. Thank you to Beth Shalom for hosting, and to the Hal Choir, to Hal and Nan Klein of Teletime Video for producing the video for tonight, and to Jason Hagler and his team at Rapid Motion Technologies for all the behind-the-scenes work that make this night possible. Okay, I'm going to now call up each of the 6 survivors to light a candle in memory of 1 million victims of the Shoah, and then we'll conclude with Cal Male and Ani Manin. Just a quick note, as we know, we see how we can enjoy together community events. We want to just remind people that on Monday, May 1st at 7:15 p.m. in Israel Woodmere will be hosting the Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut program for the community with a screening of On the Map. One final note, as you depart from the room tonight, please feel free to take your tight candles from the hallway, and please also take note of volunteers from an organization called Blue Card. Blue Card provides financial assistance to improve the lives of Holocaust survivors who are living at or below the poverty line. While the number of survivors decreases, the financial needs of elderly survivors remains. Please consider learning more about Blue Card and what we as a community can do to help the survivors in need. Okay. Mr. Arthur Greenbaum. Mr. Arthur Greenbaum was born in Hungary in 1924. During the war, his 2 brothers were taken to Russia by the Germans. Arthur was a slave laborer in the Bucharest Ghetto in Romania. In 1943, Arthur joined the battalion of the Hungarian army until 1944, when he was sent to the Mauthausen concentration camp where he spent a year. In 1946, Arthur came to the United States. He worked for many years in the garment industry. In 1956, Arthur's parents made Aliyah. He didn't see them for almost 30 years, but was able to make a trip to see them before they passed away. Arthur's wife and daughter passed away about 3 years ago. His son lives with his family in Indiana. In 1939, Mrs. Lee Lichtman was 9 years old and living in Silsa, which was then Czechoslovakia and now is part of the Ukraine. She had 2 younger sisters and 1 older brother. She lived in her home until 1944, while her father was taken to a labor camp in 1942. She and many members of her extended family were taken to Auschwitz, where her 2 sisters, Zlata and Lima, were gassed immediately upon their arrival. Lee was in the camp for about 6 weeks and survived with her aunt and mother. Her mother and aunt both survived 5 work camps prior to the death march. In 1945, when Lee was 14, she went on the final death march with her aunt and mother, and they all survived. However, Lee's mother passed away 3 weeks before liberation. After some time, Lee hitchhiked home with her aunt, searching for survivors, where she miraculously reunited with her father and brother. They all left Czechoslovakia in 1948 and headed to New York. Lee's father ultimately made Aliyah his dream in the 70s and lived a wonderful life there. Lee and her late husband ran the Yom HaShoah program for the Valley Street community for many years. Lee has 3 children, 15 grandchildren, and 13 great-grandchildren. Israel Capel. was born in Lodz, Poland, and emigrated to Belgium with his parents Jacob and Sarah and siblings Helen, Regine, Charles, and Fanny in 1930. 10 years later, in May 1940, when the Nazis overran Belgium, their struggle to survive began. Israel and his family paid non-Jews to hide them for almost 2 years, but on April 27, 1944, they were betrayed and subsequently interned in transit camps in Malines, Belgium, from where 25,000 Jews were deported to Auschwitz. Israel and his family were on an exchange list which temporarily spared them from deportation. Miraculously, Israel and his immediate family survived. Israel wrote a book titled 22 Miracles, in which he described the experiences that have so profoundly affected his life. Israel emigrated to the United States with his wife Eva and daughter Michelle. Israel and Eva had 2 more children, a son Kenny and another daughter Nettie. They are blessed with many grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Israel has recently been interviewed by his great-granddaughter Evie's classmates about his wartime experiences. Mrs. Ruchi Finankle was born in Dubov, which was Czechoslovakia then and is now part of the Ukraine. She was the oldest child in her family and had 4 younger brothers. Mrs. Finankle's father was taken to a labor camp when he was 39 years old. Her mother Mindel and brothers Eliyahu, Eliezer, Moshe, and Yosef were taken to Auschwitz, where they all died. Ruchi and a cousin were sent with Christian papers to Budapest. She was reunited with her father after the war. Together, they searched for surviving family members and then went to Satmar. Ruchi's father had been a successful businessman before the war, and during the war had procured a 10-carat diamond. He used this to help him navigate to safety and eventually to take care of surviving family members after the war. Mrs. Finankle's father remarried and remained in Vienna until his death in 1984. He had 2 more children. After the war, Mrs. Finankle went to Haifa, Israel, where she opened a boutique and lived in an apartment with her husband. Her husband, also a survivor, had been in the Swiss house in Budapest during the war. Though the Nazis were not permitted to enter the Swiss house, a Nazi accessed a small opening in the yard and shot 2 people, including Ruchi's husband's father, Jonah Finankle. Mrs. Finankle and her husband eventually moved from Israel to Queens, New York when the quota opened in 1958. They had 2 daughters. Mrs. Finankle focuses on what Hashem did for the survivors to allow them to continue on and create new families out of the ashes. She has 2 daughters, 9 grandchildren, and a newborn great-granddaughter, Leora. Mayor Glickman was born in Sosnowiec, Poland on April 20th, 6 days in ER, in 1926, a city which had a pre-war Jewish population of 30,000 Jews. Meir was one of 9 children. His father, Rabbi Yoshua, was chief rabbi. His mother, Deborah Perel, was a descendant of many great Hasidic rabbis. As conditions deteriorated after the Nazis invaded, young Meir Glickman was forced to scrub the city streets on his hands and knees as a way to humiliate the Jewish population. In December 1942, the Jews of Sosnowiec were ordered to assemble at the local soccer stadium to register. When it became the turn of the Glickman family, the Nazi officer separated young Meir and his brother Yosef from the rest of the family. Their mother cried and pleaded to keep the family together. It was at this point that Rabbi Glickman said to his wife, "At least we will have 2 to recite Kaddish for us." It was this premonition, or bracha, from their father that gave both Meir and his brother the strength to fight on and try to survive. Meir was deported to his first concentration camp in February 1943. By the end of the war, he would survive 5 different concentration camps.